Today, I am delighted to be talking to Dr. Saima Khan about how she reversed her narcolepsy. Dr. Saima is a board-certified pediatrician and board-certified in medical toxicology. She's going to be telling us all about her experiences with narcolepsy and about her practice that focuses on the root causes of fatigue and brain health issues. If you're a physician who wants to uplevel your sleep medicine knowledge, go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you can keep learning about sleep. I'm Dr. Nishi Bhopal. I'm a physician specializing in integrative psychiatry and sleep medicine. And a quick note for doctors before we jump into the video, I'd like to invite you to get my free sleep mini course. It's for outpatient doctors and filled with lots of practical tips that you can use in your clinical practice today. The link to that is in the video description, or you can get it at intrabalance.com/doctors. All right, Dr. Saima, I'm really excited for this conversation. We connected on Facebook, talking about narcolepsy, and you shared how you reversed your narcolepsy using a root cause approach. So I'd love to hear more about that. But before we even get into that, can you tell our viewers a bit about yourself, your background, and then maybe your journey into your narcolepsy diagnosis?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here today. So originally, I'm a board certified pediatrician and a toxicologist. And now I consider myself a functional and integrative doctor, which I am. And I see both adults and children in my practice. My practice is a virtual practice in Florida currently, and I'm looking into expanding my reach to patients in other states by getting additional licenses, since I've had inquiries from other people from other states as well. So the journey into narcolepsy has been quite a bit of a ride and interesting. And looking back, I think it started when I was in medical school about 3 decades ago, when I would just have a crash in the afternoon, sometime after lunch. And I grew up in Pakistan, and that's where I went to medical school. So I had to get a dorm room. I lived in the same city, about 20 minutes away from the medical school that I was attending, but I had to get a dorm room because I would just have this crash of energy and excessive sleepiness in the afternoon. So I would go run to my room, take a quick nap, and be ready for my afternoon clinicals. And I think there wasn't really much awareness. The description of narcolepsy that you sort of learn about in textbooks is somebody who's just sitting there and sleeping and dozing off. And I probably didn't fit that exact description or the severity of that description at that point. So, I was surrounded by doctors. I was surrounded, I just went undetected. I got through my residency somehow. I was very driven. So I think between my drive and just being able to overcome the sleepiness or the fatigue, and it wasn't so bad at that time, I got through residency, got through my fellowship. But after I got done, I just did not have the energy. And I say energy because I think with narcolepsy, there's also a fatigue issue. I just didn't have the energy to work full time and, take care of my responsibilities as a wife, as a mother, which I was. I had a child at that time. I had a young child at that time. My daughter was actually she was 2 years old when I got done with my training. So I just decided to work part-time. And I worked part-time for several years until I moved to Florida. I trained in Michigan. And at that point, it just became too much to really juggle everything. So I decided to step away from medicine. So believe it or not, I became a stay-at-home mom for about 7 years. And it was during this time that, what I tell people is that any illness does not just happen. It's a continuum. So the process starts in your body, and if things go undetected, it's just like a leaky faucet. If you have a leaky faucet, it keeps dripping until there is a flood under the sink or in the sink, or if there's a leaky, pipe under the sink, you're just going to get a lot of damage. So the same thing happens with the human body. Interestingly, my husband at that time was a sleep specialist. So I was living with someone who kept telling me that I needed to get a sleep study. And as I think happens with a lot of people, you're either in denial or you just wait until things really fall apart. I waited until I couldn't, basically I hit rock bottom. So I got to the point where I was having a hard time driving my kids to school. And that's when I decided to get a sleep study. And my sleep study showed the MSLT, as you know, that's what you need for a diagnosis of narcolepsy. The MSLT was a classic textbook picture of narcolepsy. In fact, the tech called my husband at that time saying that, you really need to do something about this. This is so classical. So that's when my journey with stimulants began. So I went on different stimulants. I've been on pretty much all of them: Ritalin, Metadate, Vyvanse, Provigil. I've been on all the medications. So each one of them would work for a few months, and then I would start having side effects. One of the big things I noticed, I would get really angry or cranky, irritable at my kids. And then with Vyvanse, for instance, I couldn't sleep until late at night and crash on the weekends to catch up. So basically, I exhausted all those options, and then came time for Xyrem. And all this time, my husband kept telling me, you need to be on Xyrem, you need to be on Xyrem. And I just kept holding it off. And I was seeing one of his associates. So I got started on Xyrem. And within a week of being on Xyrem, I had these very interesting side effects. So I developed a mask-like facial expression. I became extremely anxious. And there were some changes in my handwriting. And I feel like there were some features of Parkinson's that were happening. So obviously, the Xyrem got stopped immediately, much to my husband's dismay at that point, because this was a drug that he had felt I needed to be on to help me with my symptoms. And that was really, a low point in my life, because I had exhausted all the options in that conventional medicine had to offer at that time. And that's when I started looking for answers. So that was a time in my life where I loved to read. And I remember vividly sitting on my patio, reading a book and dozing off after every 2 sentences. And the other part that I recall of that period when I was on the different pharmaceuticals was that despite being on the pharmaceuticals, I would still have a hard time driving. There were times when I felt sleepy despite being on the strong stimulants. So once I got off the Xyrem, that's when I basically realized that I needed to look for answers outside of the conventional Western toolbox. And unfortunately, I think for me that, I had been surrounded by a family of doctors, all Western, all trained in conventional Western medicine. And plus my own training had been so conventional. And I think a lot of us physicians, when we go through conventional Western medical training, we're almost brainwashed, I would like to say, to believe that alternative treatments are not good. There is no evidence behind them, or they don't work, or the people who are practicing those forms of treatment, they're not really good doctors. So I always looked at, unfortunately, I looked at integrative and functional doctors with that kind of light until then. And I was introduced into functional medicine by one of my friends And before that, I also tried, I was so desperate. I tried other things. I tried cupping, energy medicine. So I was trying all these different things to get better. And they were actually, little by little, I was feeling improvement. I started working on my diet. So I changed my diet. My diet, I was very conventional Western, or let me put it this way. It was, I was making ethnic food, Pakistani food, but it was not a diet that was rich in plant nutrients, or, it was carb heavy. So I changed my diet, added a lot more protein, a lot more, plant nutrients. I did eliminate gluten. I did eliminate dairy from my diet, sugar also, and, made a lot of lifestyle changes, eliminated toxins or toxic products from my home. And as my journey into functional medicine began, the layers just kept peeling. So I discovered that narcolepsy is not just a deficiency of, a stimulant in your brain or Xyrem in your brain. It's really a complex disorder. It's there is an autoimmune component to it, as is known in conventional Western medicine. So there is an autoimmune component, but the approach from an integrative and functional perspective is different. There's also an inflammatory component to it. And that is my own personal sort of inference from my experience that, when you have autoimmunity, you have the body generating antibodies that are attacking the brain. There is an inflammatory component. So you have these chemicals or cytokines that are produced at the same time. So I want you to also think of it as an analogy that I like to give people is when you fall sick, say you come down with a cold or a flu, what happens? One of the things that happens is that you feel sleepy. So it's a similar kind of a process that's happening because your body is generating these inflammatory chemicals. So there are so many different aspects to narcolepsy, or the root cause of narcolepsy. So the big one, as I said, there is autoimmunity. So controlling the autoimmunity is important. Diet is a part of it. An autoimmune paleo diet is often used for many autoimmune conditions in the functional and integrative medicine space. So I found that beneficial to help reduce my symptoms. However, diet is important, but it's still not addressing the root causes. So again, once we start thinking about the root causes, well, before I move further, so one of the other aspects is mast cell activation. So mast cells are these cells that line our body wherever it's at an interface with the environment. So our skin, gut, eyes, nose, sinuses, vagina, all of those. So those can get activated in response to environmental triggers, and mold is a big one. They can also get activated due to COVID. And interestingly, I had COVID earlier this year, and I actually felt that I had a relapse of narcolepsy, and I will get into that. But fortunately, it was short-lived because I knew what to do. So mast cells, controlling the mast cells was something that I found to be important as a part of my healing journey. And then, another thing that I want you to think about from a root cause perspective is mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are the energy producing organelles, or, in the cells, there are these little bodies that produce energy. So I want you to think of them as a powerhouse of the cell. So in narcolepsy, there is going to be mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria are not working very well. Now, why are they not working very well? Environmental toxins will affect the mitochondria at the basic level and sort of act as a wrench in all the cellular processes that are happening. So mitochondrial dysfunction can occur due to nutritional deficiencies. Something very, very basic. I had a low ferritin. So, had to work on getting that up. And then you can have deficiencies, which can be measured of other mitochondrial cofactors. So basically working on mitochondrial health is important. And that can be achieved to some degree by supplementing with products that help mitochondrial function. But what I found was that you can only get so far by doing that. So you really have to work on removing, the drivers of mitochondrial dysfunction. So toxins, environmental toxins are a big piece. Mold is one of them. So it is believed that up to 70% of homes or buildings in the United States have a mold issue. So unfortunately, mold was an issue in our home, and something we could not see. And so, that is a big piece. And I also find that, so I do have patients with narcolepsy and, they have exactly the same drivers. So, and mold is one of those things which will affect your gut health. It'll affect the hormones. It will affect even, say, for instance, your thyroid. Your thyroid gland is also a part of that energy generation. So, a fatigue, which, as I said, is a part of that whole, clinical picture. Again, uncovering all the layers. So working with the environmental toxins and, removing them is important. And in the functional and integrative space, there are treatments that can be done to remove the environmental toxins. Also working on other environmental toxins that someone may be exposed to. Those could be recent exposures, past exposures, for instance, lead. That's a mitochondrial toxin as well. So one of the things that was uncovered with the numerous investigations, and this is not checked, the testing is unconventional. It's not the way I learned it in my fellowship, unfortunately. So I did have some lead in my body. And then I think one of the biggest surprise, well, before I get to that, so infections. So we all have, people get exposed to different infections in their life. And the one infection that's easily recognized to resurface is herpes, for instance. Now, so I want you to think of herpes because, that's very well recognized. So if somebody has stress, they will get herpes cold sores. But the same way, there can be other infections that are sitting in the body, not very well recognized clinically, because doctors don't learn about them. Or, the awareness is not there in the conventional Western realm. And I think this was, some of these I was able to detect early. So you can have fungal overgrowth, a concept not recognized again in conventional Western medicine. And so the fungal overgrowth, can be in the gut, it can be in the sinuses, and especially if people are living in a moldy environment, there can be fungal overgrowth affecting them. So that has to be treated. And one of the metabolites that these mold and fungi and yeast or candida produce in the body is acetaldehyde, which will give you that drunkenness, kind of an effect. So treating that is important. Also gut dysbiosis or imbalances in the gut microbiome can affect how you feel as far as that sleepiness. So what I felt was in my journey, as I peeled through those layers, I kept getting better and better. And then there were times when I would, sort of treat incompletely, and I could feel that I'm relapsing. So I realized that I had to continue the treatment. I think the last missing piece, and I feel an important piece, and to me, a very shocking piece, was Lyme and co-infections. And that is something that I also find so far, I've found that in all my patients with narcolepsy. So that is, again, a piece, chronic Lyme. So I want you to think of this as chronic COVID. So just like there can be chronic COVID or COVID long haul, which is recognized. So we all know that once you get COVID, you can get symptoms from COVID for a long time. Unfortunately, chronic Lyme is not recognized in conventional Western medicine. And the treatment of chronic Lyme, again, is not recognized. And that has been a part of my recovery as well. So Lyme and co-infections, including Bartonella and Babesia, along with other viral infections also. So I've done a lot of extensive testing on myself. And a lot of it also boils down to the immune system, because, the immune system has to be well enough or proficient enough to control these infections and the many things that can affect the immune system. And mold is one of them, because, mold will suppress the immune system. COVID will suppress the immune system, just like, I felt when I had COVID earlier this year, I felt I had a narcolepsy relapse for a couple of weeks. And that's when I realized that I had the Lyme and co-infections, because I knew what to do. I'd done the research on long COVID, and there was a bit of a missing piece. Like, I was still feeling a little sleepy in the afternoon, and I would still have to take a quick nap. But once I uncovered that piece, I really felt much better. And I can actually work through the day. Prior to that, I couldn't work till the afternoon. So I feel like that was another big important piece. And then I think the last thing I would like to mention is that people who have narcolepsy, I've tried to do a lot of research into it as to is their genetics. And I think from a functional and integrative perspective, the piece that I understand as being the driver is, detoxification. Like, people who have narcolepsy, they're not able to get rid of environmental toxins very easily because they have genetics that predisposes them to not be able to do that. There is something called methylation, which is a concept that is very popular in the lay public also. And there is a methylation piece to narcolepsy as well. So you really need to optimize the B vitamins and B12 and folate to help the cells function better. So B12 and folate have a role in the mitochondrial function. And so that, and also detoxification. So that is also important. So I think that's in a nutshell, like my probably 6 years of my life summarized in a nutshell.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's so much to unpack there. And I think maybe some things that might be helpful for viewers are, if we can go back a little bit to maybe some definitions. What is integrative medicine? What is functional medicine? I know some people might be listening and going, well, what is that? Or are they different? Are they the same? Could you explain a bit about what integrative medicine is, what's functional medicine, and what are the differences?
Absolutely.
The other thing I'll just add is just tagging on to what you were saying before is that in conventional medicine, there is this idea, well, that's quackery, it's not evidence-based, or it's just about doing, tons of supplements and it's a money-making scheme. I see all these kinds of comments about integrative and functional. So maybe if you could speak to that as well.
Absolutely. So integrative medicine is, just as the word sort of is self-explanatory, it integrates. So it integrates conventional Western medicine with other modalities of treatment. So for instance, acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Islamic medicine. Like, so instance, in my situation, I went to energy healers who used that, or cupping. So I used the Islamic medicine form of cupping. There's Chinese cupping, which also helped me. So integrating the different modalities of treatment. There can be others too, like meditation or treatments which involve some kind of an electrical stimulation. One that I used in my journey, for instance, was frequency-specific microcurrent and PEMF. So you're basically integrating all the different treatment modalities, not just using pharmaceuticals, which is really the basis of conventional Western medicine. Diet is a big piece also, so all of those. So that's integrative medicine. Now, functional medicine, I feel it's a very interesting word because in the conventional Western medicine world, when physicians, and I was guilty of being one of those physicians at that time, when you don't know what causes something, very often people will be labeled as having a functional disorder. But functional medicine is very different. And perhaps you can actually use functional medicine to, actually, I would say a lot of those people who are labeled as having a functional disorder, if you actually use functional medicine, you will unearth the root cause of their conditions. There is a real root cause. It's not just something in their head. So functional medicine is basically looking for the root cause. So the analogy that is often used is that you have a sink that is overflowing. So in Western medicine, you're going to be mopping the floor. You're basically treating the symptoms. So you're just trying to keep the floor dry by mopping it. But the root cause in that situation is that the tap is turned on and that's filling the sink and it's leaking. It's flowing over. So addressing the root cause would be to turn off the sink. So that's basically functional medicine. In functional medicine, you're looking for the root cause. It's generally not one. So another example, for instance, that's very often used in the dementia world, if people are familiar with the work of Dr. Bredesen, he talks about how dementia is, he uses the analogy of leaks in the roof. So you can have multiple leaks in the roof of your home. And if you're just addressing one leak with a medication, you're not addressing the rest. So the problem is going to persist. So you have to patch up all the holes. So that's basically what functional medicine is. You're identifying the root causes and you are addressing them. And I think in my personal experience, as I said, until I addressed the last piece, the Lyme and co-infections, I did not feel I was better. And there was still a layer to uncover. And I think that this was the, probably the last bit that was left in my head. I just didn't want to get into the Lyme world. Like, I didn't think I could ever have Lyme. Like, where did I get it? I still don't know. Or the Lyme and co-infections. It's not just one. Generally, you get Lyme and co-infections. So that's essentially functional medicine. You have to address all the root causes. So what I tell people is basically you're basically uncovering them one by one, and until you get to that goal of great health where you can function fully and live your life the way you want to or are meant to, you just have to keep uncovering and being a detective.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think that that was an excellent explanation and it makes so much sense. And I'm curious because in the conventional medicine world, the average time to diagnosis of narcolepsy is over a decade. And so for you, it sounds like it took a long time to get the diagnosis, to go for the testing, get the diagnosis. Then you tried these conventional treatments, which weren't really helping you. And I see that a lot in my practice with patients with narcolepsy. It's, yeah, maybe the stimulants kind of help or Xyrem or whatnot, but it's not really, like you said, getting to the root causes, and they're still suffering. People are still suffering. So you did that, and then you started uncovering all of these root causes. So how long did this whole process take? I can imagine you've been working on this for many years.
I have. So I've been working on this since 2016. Um, and, my symptoms, I went to medical school back in the 90s. So my symptoms started, I mean, I can identify my symptoms starting then, like low grade, obviously not to the point where I was dysfunctional and could not work. Like, I went to medical school. I did well in medical school. I did well in residency and, logged in a lot of hours as well. And fellowship too. But then when I really had the option to cut back, I felt that, I could balance my life better by cutting down on my work. So I think my symptoms really went on for about 3 decades, unfortunately. And then about, I would say maybe a little more than a year on the medications. And then it's been a few years of, the journey in functional and integrative medicine. The mold piece came early. I think that was a big piece. I was fortunately able to identify that early, but I just had a resistance in my own head, I think, to the Lyme and co-infections piece. So that came much later. But that I feel has been a big piece as well.
But I'd love to get into that as well. And before we even go there, did you have symptoms of cataplexy as well?
I did not. No, I did not. But I did have some mild POTS symptom when I was really sick. So I think that is mast cell activation and a babesia, which is a Lyme co-infection.
Yes. So, okay. So I can imagine that anyone who's listening, if they're maybe the person themselves is struggling with narcolepsy or excessive daytime sleepiness and fatigue, or for the practitioner who's listening, I can imagine they're thinking like, okay, where do you even start? There's mast cell, Lyme and co-infections, there's autoimmunity, inflammation, gut health. How does somebody start addressing these different pieces and trying to figure out the root cause? What would you recommend?
I think the first thing you can do at home without going to anybody is work on your diet, right? So remove the inflammatory foods and basically replace your plate with foods that will nourish your body. So I tell people half your plate should be vegetables, so plant nutrients. They help your gut. They help with detox. And then a quarter should be protein. Ideally grass-fed, pasture-raised chicken or beef, and 2 servings of fish a week, and not so much red meat. Generally I tell people a couple of times a month is good, and a third should be grains. Now, if people can get into an autoimmune paleo kind of a diet, if their diet is not restrictive from before, then that's great. That will help reduce your symptoms. But it will not get rid of the root, it will not address the underlying drivers of the autoimmunity. So for that, you have to peel through the layers of the toxins and the infections and the gut health. There are medications. So there is a medication, for instance, in the integrative and functional space called LDN, which also helps. I mean, it's a piece. It's not a huge piece, but it is a piece. And basically bringing the inflammation down in the body. And, once you're treating the infections and getting rid of the toxins, that helps. So what do you do for that? So for that, I really think you have to work with a skilled practitioner. Unfortunately, in my own journey also, I did go to some practitioners, but I did have to do the work. I did go to a couple of functional practitioners, but unfortunately, they did not identify the mold and the Lyme and the co-infections. So I had to do that work myself. So that's why I say you really need to go to somebody who's skilled, who knows, who's familiar with the mold and Lyme and co-infection world. So in this space, they're called mold literate and Lyme literate. LLMD is the word, Lyme literate MD. So ideally, if you have narcolepsy, then you should go to somebody who's a mold and Lyme literate MD or DO.
So if someone has, for the patient or the referring practitioner, so maybe, if you're a sleep doctor or psychiatrist and you're working with a patient who has narcolepsy, how do they find a Lyme literate or mold literate practitioner? Is there a registry or directory somewhere?
Yes. So for Lyme, there is the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. So it's called ILADS. They have a website. And there is a doctor, his name is Dr. Tom Moorcroft. He has a training program. So I'm actually training with him. It's called LDPC, Lyme Disease Practitioner Certification. You can go to either of these two websites and find a practitioner that's Lyme literate. A lot of these practitioners are also going to be mold literate because you can't really get into one without getting into the other, is what I have realized, and which a lot of practitioners realize as well. If you, regarding mold, so I trained with an expert in mold illness. His name is Dr. Neil Nathan. He's actually on the West Coast and he's retired now, and he has a list of practitioners on his website who follow, his treatment protocol or something that he basically has treated a lot of patients with and they recovered. And a lot of the practitioners on his website also have, they are Lyme literate as well. So generally, when you're looking for a functional and integrative medicine physician, another way you can do it is you can go to, so for instance, I also certified in functional medicine through the Institute of Functional Medicine, but I felt that, to really get to the layers of the Lyme and mold, I had to get some more training in treating myself also. So, I mean, there are a lot of practitioners on the IFM website as well, but not all of them are Lyme and mold literate. So if you're going that route, then you really have to make sure that they are mold and Lyme literate. So essentially, I think go back to either, ILADS, LDPC, or Dr. Neil Nathan's website. I think I would like to add one more thing. I feel that there is a big inflammatory component, almost to some extent, I mean, not quite. So there is a pediatric condition called PANS and PANDAS. So pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome and pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome due to strep. That is an autoimmune condition. It's autoimmune encephalitis, and it's an inflammatory brain disorder. So narcolepsy is also autoimmune. You have, it's believed in conventional Western medicine also that you have an effect on the hypocretin secreting, neurons in the hypothalamus, and they're being attacked. so I feel that there are a lot of similarities between a condition which is recognized in children, not very well recognized in adults. And I personally have not had, testing along the lines of antibodies against the brain because I didn't feel it was necessary. I was treating it. It's a clinical diagnosis, but I feel that there is an inflammatory component very similar to PANS and PANDAS. So you also get brain fog, for instance. There's a lot of brain fog. Generally, people will have brain fog with narcolepsy, fatigue with narcolepsy. And when you look at the PANS and PANDAS population, I mean, they do have other symptoms like anxiety and OCD, which are hallmark symptoms, which patients with narcolepsy don't always have. But I feel like there are some parallels with the inflammation and autoimmunity and the brain.
I think we could keep on going, but in the interest of time, this was so fascinating. And again, for the practitioners who are listening, many of our viewers may be, conventionally trained and don't have much exposure to integrative or functional medicine. So what are a couple of takeaways that you want them to leave this conversation with?
So one takeaway is that, Western medicine has a role. It helps to reduce symptoms, but if you don't uncover the underlying root causes, then the damage that's happening in the body just continues to happen. And over a period of time, people will generally get worse, or, you're also limited because of the side effects. So if you really want to help your patients, then you have to empower them and refer them to places where they can get help. The unfortunate part of this is that integrative and functional medicine is not recognized, by insurance companies. So insurance companies are generally driven by, the pharmaceutical industry. And so this kind of care is not covered by insurance companies. So you have to really invest in your health and make the choices, really. And the other thing I tell people is that, once you treat, I mean, I've had a long journey. I've had a hard journey financially also. I personally have experienced it. I could have been on a drug which costs $80,000 a year, Xyrem, at least the last I checked. And at the moment, I don't actually have health insurance, but I can actually function. I can be productive. I do have to, basically pay for my healthcare outside of the insurance system, but I'm not spending, something in the range of $80,000 a year. So in the end, it's an investment in your health, and you really need to think of this as an empowerment and an investment in your health to get better.
It's amazing. It's really empowering. And so are you taking any medications currently for narcolepsy?
So no, I'm not. So I think the last time, I'll really have to go back and look at the year it was, but it was either 2016 or 18. That's the last time I took. I think it was 2016. That was the last time I took something for narcolepsy. I had so many side effects. Like my kids were little at that time, and I would just get so crabby at them, and I couldn't sleep. And I would still have an afternoon crash while being on the stimulants. I just got to the point, and then with Xyrem, the misfortunes with Xyrem, I just basically decided that this was not for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your story. And it's so fascinating. And, in my own practice, I've seen great improvements with just the anti-inflammatory diet approach, just starting with that, like you said. And I think that's something that almost every practitioner can do, even if you're not trained in integrative or functional medicine. Counseling your patients on those dietary interventions that you listed out earlier can have a significant impact on your patients with narcolepsy, but anyone who's struggling with fatigue, brain fog, I see it helpful in patients with depression, anxiety as well. It's really impactful.
Absolutely. And, I think that's where, when you mention all those conditions or symptoms, I think there's so many overlaps, like with the brain symptoms, right? Or the fatigue. Like for myself too, like trying to figure out, okay, is this fatigue or is this excessive sleepiness, right? So there are overlaps in the brain fog.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for practitioners like yourself. And I think it's so powerful when you've gone through your own journey with these struggles. And narcolepsy, can be incredibly debilitating for people. Like you said, I mean, you couldn't even drive. It was hard to take care of your kids. It's hard to function. People find it hard to work. Really, it takes a significant toll. And so it's just incredible to hear how you've overcome the symptoms. It's been a journey, and there's been lots of unpacking to do with the root causes. But I think it's hopeful to hear your story.
Thank you. Yes. I do consider myself very fortunate that I was able to overcome it and or have the awareness and, the ability to to dig through the root causes.
Absolutely. And so, can you tell people about your practice? If anyone wants to send patients to you, what's the process?
Sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
So my practice is currently a virtual Florida practice. So I see patients virtually all over Florida, but I've had some inquiries. Somehow the word has got around. I've had a few people call me from other states. So I'm looking into getting additional state licenses. The one thing I can do currently is, if you already have an integrative and functional physician, or a practitioner, then I can do a practitioner to practitioner consult, to help them work on your case while consulting with me. But as far as direct patient care is concerned right now, I'm only licensed in the state of Florida. So if you're in Florida, if any of your viewers are in Florida, my website is www.rebalance, REBALANCE, family, FAMILY, health, HEALTH.com. And I have a discovery call link there. You can schedule a complimentary discovery call with me. I also have an Instagram page or account. It's Dr. Saima, Dr. Saima, Saima, Khan, Khan, MD, and you can follow me there. I'm trying to get more active on that. So, I will, I'm sure you will learn helpful things on there as well.
Wonderful. So we'll put those links in the video description so you can check out Dr. Saima's website and her social media. And Dr. Saima, do you work with all ages or adults only?
I do actually. I do work with all ages. What I, realized was I treated myself as an adult. And originally I'm a pediatrician. My toxicology training was both adults and kids. So I do work with all ages. Currently I have patients in my practice anywhere from 2 years of age till 73.
Wow. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and sharing your expertise. There's so much to learn. I'll have to go back and watch and listen to this again because you shared so many pearls. So I really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with me today.
Thank you as well. This was truly an honor being here today. Thank you.